it really can help facilitate, oh, this meeting is being recorded, we're consenting. Having your cameras on really can facilitate a sense of community and connection and engagement in a little bit of a different way as we convene in this virtual space. So certainly though, it's totally up to you how you choose to participate tonight, and we would just invite you to consider joining us in turning your cameras on. And then finally, just because we're very aware that this topic can be pretty challenging, we do want to provide you with some resources to take care of yourself should you feel activated at all. And certainly you will know what works best for you as the experts of yourselves. So if you need to step away or anything like that, please feel free. And I also am going to drop a quick Google Drive link in the chat. It is a resource document that you can access. I can share that later as well. If anybody's interested in taking a look at that, it's just some self-care resources to be thinking about and noticing and keeping in mind as we chat tonight. And so I'm just going to go ahead and get us started. And again, people are just going to continue to flow into this space to join us. My name is Whitney Maris. I am a social worker who is currently employed as a project manager with the Institute on Trauma and Trauma-Informed Care. And I'm also a member of the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice, or CTIP, as you may have heard it called. I'm a member of the National Trauma Campaign Core Team. And as we're all gathering here, sort of beginning our conversation, I would really invite all of you to visit our website at ctip.org/National Trauma Campaign. If you are seeking some action steps on how to help advance policies and practices that are related to the topics we'll be chatting about here tonight, so important. And it's just want to remind you that everyone here has the power to play a role in cultivating cultures of support and healing for our caregivers and other people who've been impacted by trauma. And it's just really a great way to take meaningful action if you're feeling as invigorated as I am to do so after watching this spectacular film. And co-facilitating the conversation with me tonight is Erin Connolly, who does many amazing things, including being a licensed clinical social worker with over 20 years of experience working as a therapist, including delivering trauma-specific interventions. And she is also a school social worker. And as if that isn't enough, she's a certified yoga teacher and is also representing CTIP with me tonight as she serves on their board. There are a couple of other fantastic people who will be keeping our discussion tonight running smoothly that we do want to introduce you to, both of whom will be attending to all of the fabulous contributions we anticipate you making in the chat, as well as sharing some resource links with you. So first is Robin Cogan, who is a nationally certified school nurse who, in addition to sitting as a legislative co-chair for the New Jersey State School Nurses Association, can boast 20 years of experience as a New Jersey school nurse. And she's just won a litany of awards and has so much notoriety for her leadership and extensive work related to school nursing and population health. And she runs a wonderful blog called The Relentless School Nurse that will be dropped in the chat right now for you to visit. And finally, Sissy White of ACES Connection will also be responsive to our chat tonight. Sissy is an astoundingly powerful writer and activist who is revered as a national leader in the ACEs and trauma-informed movements. And I just want to take this opportunity to lift up the incredible work that Sissy has done to make this happen tonight, as she has done so much of the heavy lifting of putting this film series together. So thank you, Sissy. And that is us. So just in terms of letting you know what's on our agenda for tonight, we want to do a quick check-in with everyone. Then we'll formally introduce co-producers of Portraits of Professional Caregivers, Vic Comfort and Rodney Wittenberg, after which Erin and I will touch on a few discussion points before opening up the floor for all of our guests tonight to share, ask questions, and make comment to what you're noticing or thinking about after watching the film. And then we'll close with a brief calming exercise before parting ways right around 9 o'clock. So just to get a baseline sense of how everyone is doing, we're looking to do a quick 2-word check-in. So if you could just pop 1 or 2 words in the chat to describe how you're feeling tonight, if you are so inclined, it would be just wonderful. We want to establish that all feelings are welcome here and will not be judged, and just checking in super quickly up front can really inform all of us how to take care of ourselves and each other tonight. So on that note too, we do have that self-care resources link. I'm dropping it in the chat again for anybody who would like to take a look. It's got some phone numbers, websites, text chat support lines, and other ideas. And so, yeah, lots of us are tired, that's for sure. I am both excited and a little bit nervous to be among such superstars. So I am going to stop talking at you now, and I will invite Erin to formally introduce our co-producers, who we are just so darn thankful to have with us tonight. Take it away, Erin.
Thanks, Whitney, and thank you for all you are doing. You got to celebrate me and Sissy and Robin, and we got to celebrate you. You know, help pull this together too. So thank you so much. I'm going to introduce Vic Comfort and Rodney Wittenberg. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about them, and then we'll open up our discussion. So joining us tonight is Vic Comfort, the co-producer and director of Portraits of Professional Caregivers. Vic began his encore career in filmmaking about 12 years ago and has made several documentaries, all of which are story-driven, dramatic, personal accounts of real people's lives. In a variety of organizational settings, Vic has discovered and witnessed firsthand the passion and the pain which dedicated, empathic professional caregivers experience daily. For 15 years, he has conducted workshops that have proven to be very helpful for these professional caregivers, with this documentary itself evolving out of one of those workshops. Vic's important work on secondary trauma has been incredibly successful in raising awareness about the realities of the work that our professional caregivers do. Vic also is part of the Philadelphia ACEs task force, and he might mention something about that, but he is also on the policy committees around secondary trauma. And in Philadelphia, they've done some amazing work with city council. Am I correct, Vic?
Correct.
I'm throwing that one in there. That was not written down here because I do remember it. And then also with us tonight is Rodney Wittenberg, the co-producer and composer of Portraits of Professional Caregivers. Rodney has a varied and rich background, includes a depth of experience in musical composition, recording, sound mix, and the scoring of films. He is also an experienced videographer and film editor. I lost my page here, so. He also owns and manages his own production studio, Melody Vision, and he is a sought-after teacher of filmmaking at a number of Philadelphia colleges. Rodney has been involved in the Philadelphia music and filmmaking realm for more than 20 years. He has worked on numerous projects involving real-life situations and personal issues, including the fabulous film that we're about to discuss tonight. So Vic, Rodney, thank you so much for being here. Why don't we get started with Vic and or Rodney, whoever wants to go first. If you could make a comment or two about what struck you most about making this film.
Well, this film has sort of been in my crawl, so to speak, for 2 or 3 decades. I worked in child welfare for 20 years at about every level, and this is where I not only experienced but witnessed secondary trauma, also called compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma. As we know, there are some shades of differences in those definitions, but they're all really related to the usually painful reaction. I used to call it grief, the grief that the child welfare workers were having as they witnessed and as they tried to take care of the children and families. So what has surprised and impressed me is discovering in the process of making the film and doing the research and working closely with Rodney, that this phenomenon crosses so many different professional groups. And that's what we've focused on in the film. It's not just about child welfare, but that was the seed, the inception. The idea came from that. And then we began to discover and document in the film many stories of people in all these other areas. It's impressed me how universal the situation is. And obviously in this period of the COVID pandemic, the whole public is becoming much more aware, particularly of the suffering of the healthcare workers. There have been many stories they don't always name it correctly or even give it a name, but they're really describing secondary trauma in most instances. Of course, the most dramatic of those stories was that of Dr. Loma Breen, the doctor in New York City, the director of the emergency care, who completed suicide. And that's one of the most extreme probable manifestations from what we know about her story. But yeah, the surprise to me has been to discover how widespread it is and how relevant this topic has become, especially in the last 6 or 8 months.
Thank you. And Rodney, do you want to give your thoughts?
Yeah, there's so much I learned from working on the film, and so much since we've been screening it. I think the thing that has been the most surprising is just how the film keeps on going. Usually in the life of a film, after it's been out for a few years, it tends, particularly documentaries, they tend to be less relevant or information changes, but it seems like the longer the film is around, the more relevant it becomes. And I think that is, I always say it's a testament to Vic's vision. When we first started working on the film, I guess it was 2011, right, Vic?
About that.
Yeah, about that. There were the only people who knew what secondary trauma was were people in the field. Nobody was really talking about it in the public, and I knew about it because I used to run a nonprofit where I worked with at-risk youth, and I jokingly say I collect therapists. So I have a lot of therapists and social workers in my life and various relationships, and so I knew what all of you go through. And so when Vic mentioned it to me, I was like, okay, I get it. Let's see what we can do. And again, I would say that the biggest surprise is how more and more people are becoming aware of of what secondary trauma is, and also how important it is to take care of the people that take care of us.
Profound. And, shining a spotlight on what you depict in the film is such a vital conversation to have at any time. And yeah, absolutely, the human condition, it will endure for a very long time, this conversation. And yet, certainly, wow, how profoundly strong these stories are resonating right now as we collectively navigate dual pandemics of COVID-19 and racial injustice and the civil unrest stemming therefrom. And so I'm just wondering if either of you could, or both of you, could make comment to what we see in the film in relation to the current context of what we're watching these testimonials in.
Well, I'll jump in again on that. As I mentioned just a moment ago, the healthcare workers' stories are making the front page nowadays. There's a story that I wish would come out in the media that is not there yet, and that is, and I know this is somewhat controversial, depending on kind of how you frame all this, but who is often overburdened with taking care of the public in the most extreme emergencies? Who do you call first if you're threatened or you see a dangerous individual, perhaps a person with mental health issues? It's the police, and the police are overburdened with work that is beyond their pay grade, so to speak, work that they're not trained to do. And I think there's a whole backstory, at least we refer to it in the film. I like to think of them as public servants rather than caregivers is probably not the right term, but actually they do a lot. They go into domestic abuse and everything. But I guess the point I'd like to make is that the backstory has to do with the emotional suffering that is there. And I think until that gets addressed, we're still going to have police brutality. I think the acting out occurs from a high percentage of these, mostly men and some women, have PTSD, some 18%. Many of them are returning veterans that have brought that with them. And some of them are just loose cannons who so I don't know if I'm getting a bit off track here, but I do think that the universal phenomenon includes firefighters and police and hospice and the whole range. You know, just about any profession you think of. So I would like to see that enter into the big debate that's going on right now about the police, because I don't think it's going to be solved just by quote unquote more training or by more punishment and holding them more accountable. The unspoken and unaddressed part is the emotional suffering there that is getting acted out in some of these worst cases.
Yeah, I there's so many places that I could go and talk about it and that question.
Which is not to let any of them off when these things happen, but it's just to say, if we're going to resolve it, we've got to also address this part.
Yeah, there's so many different ways I could think of responding. One of the things I was thinking was when Vic and I decided to make this film, we had three goals in mind. One was that we hoped the film would reduce some of the stigma around dealing with mental health issues. One was that we could make the public aware of what these people who take care of us on a regular basis actually go through from in day to day, and that they are human and that they are impacted by the events that happen to them, even though many of them are taught the professional thing to do is to have distance. And thirdly, is that we were able to impact some kind of political or social change. And so far, we've been able to, in some ways, achieve all three of those goals with the film. But during this time, it seems like it's on hyperdrive. The awareness of what those people who are our caregivers, and I like to put the police and firefighters in that category because I think the ones that are at their best are our caregivers. I mean, they're used to say on the side of the protect and serve, and the ones that do that are taking care of us. And so in the context of right now, I think that being able to really take some time to take a look at the mental health of all of us is critical. It's very important to for us to be able to heal and also to figure out how to move forward, both in all the different in the pandemic and the civil unrest around issues of race. I mean, how many of the people who are acting out and doing rioting and acts of destruction or violence are also suffering from secondary trauma, or are impacted on by the trauma of poverty, or impacted on just the trauma of racism. And how many of the police are responding, as Vic was saying, because of their response to secondary trauma with equal violence and force. And so I think both there is this awakening of what is at the root of all that, and my hope is that the film continues to also give people some insight as to what that is all about as they are awakening.
So I was kind of going to go the route of kind of digging deeper into the healing part, but I just want to acknowledge both what Rodney and Vic have said about, and I see some of the texts that are coming through the chat. We are experiencing a collective primary, secondary, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and we are in triage. We are constantly triaging things, and to address the mental health, mental health system was very fractured to start, and right now trying to get things in place as a therapist, as a school social worker, as somebody that's worked in all levels of human services. I'm really working hard to remember that, you know, we are all in this together. And this film reminds us of that, and really also reminds us to teach our others by example, showing that compassion, not just for others, but more specifically for ourselves. We have to show compassion to ourselves. And then I think about when we started to talk about the police, and any caregiver. The reason people become caregivers or in the profession, the helping profession, is because something must have happened to them, around them, and they wanted to change it. So now here they are, they're trying to do it their way, what they best understand. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's just from history that's what they know. So I think that there is still a lot of hope. And especially with this pandemic, I do think it gives us the opportunity to come back together and pause and say, you know, what are we going to do better? I'm just trying to also look at the comments here. But if we can kind of head into the compassion part, the collective part, the people connecting and relating to each other around these experiences. I guess Vic, Rodney, you know, and you know, if you want to put in the chat, you know, can you talk more about the empathy can be an occupational hazard? We heard about that. Touch on how, like, you know, how we show up for the caregivers. Mm-hmm. If you could just touch on that a little bit, and then also too, for whoever wants to type in, they can share their thoughts so that we can embed this in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one way that we show up, that is to say our own emotional frame of mind, depends a lot on our own quality of self-care. And there's a lot of emphasis on self-care nowadays in workshops and so forth. But I think it goes far beyond that. And the emphasis that I place is upon the organizational care, and that the quality of the relationships among the caregivers within a organization is mirrored in the quality of the caregiving. I think there's studies that show that. In social work, we often call it parallel process, but it has to do with what is the climate of the organization, how much peer caregiving is going on. What is the relationship of the worker and the supervisor, or the supervisor to the administrator? It's at every level. And organizations that create a culture of caring within their own organization will do much better. And this is a little bit of a jump maybe, but a lot of the policy work that I'm involved in right now that's come out of the film is looking at organizations that take this kind of peer and the quality of relationships very seriously. And at the very opening part of the chat room, I put in a lot of resources, including our virtual cafes that our policy group in secondary trauma here in Philadelphia.
Nick, I'll add them again. I'll copy and paste them.
Yeah. So we've had 8 of these cafes over the last 6 months, I guess. The first 6 of them focused on personal self-care, which I referred to a moment ago, and exercises for doing that, mindfulness being one of the key components, but many other aspects. And then we started a new series with models of organizational staff resiliency programming. And you'll find in there links to the recording of 2 of those cafes. One of those was with participants from Philadelphia, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP, and the other was the Support Center for Child Advocates. And in especially the latter one of those, the whole climate and atmosphere, the interaction of the staff prepares them to interact in a trauma-informed and compassionate way with the workers. So I think that's really key.
Yeah. I guess what I'm thinking of is two stories that happened as we started screening the film. I'll tell one of them. Maybe I'll get to the other one later because I don't want to drone on. But through an acquaintance of mine, we were invited to show the film out in to firefighters and first responders, way out in the burbs, in the boonies, and
The Booney Burbs, huh?
it was out pretty far. And when, I think when Vic and I first showed up, well, nobody was rude or mean to us or anything, but there was this definite feeling of that we were outsiders, and I'll leave it at that. And but as the film played and after the film, you could sense a warming to both of us because we were telling their story and they had never seen that side of their story told before. And so often, the only time, just like with social workers, the only time you really hear about first responders or firefighters or police is when they do something wrong. And this was, the screening of the film was not only a validation of who they were, but it was a celebration, even though it was talking about the impact of their work on them and how hard that is. And the brilliance of the, I guess it was the commander or the chief, I don't remember the actual title.
Captain, maybe? Mm-hmm.
Then he did something that was off of the film and off of seeing the film before we screened it to some, I guess there were about 80 or 70 or 80 people there who were firefighters and first responders and some police in the room. He went over some of the, like maybe 3 or 4 of the big cases that they had dealt with, really big traumatic, like car accidents where people had to be heliported out. And to the firefighters that were there and first responders who helped rescue those people, he brought them up, and then he surprised them because the people they had rescued were there. And it was one of the most amazing moments of healing and love and connection. And I kept thinking, wow, it's so awesome. This is what art can do. It can bring people together this way. Because normally those first responders and firefighters don't get that other side. And I think so often, too, with social workers and, counselors, teachers, you don't always get to see the result of all the hard work you've done with someone. Maybe you get a glimpse of it. Maybe you see them grow a little bit, but you don't really get to see them thriving and really healing or healed. And so going back to the original question about that compassion, there's so much more that organizationally can be done to take care of the people who are doing this important vital work. And but I think there has to be a outcry, a both from the people doing the work and the general public. And that goes back to the time we're in. I hope, I have faith that the general public, once the pandemic is over, won't forget the first responders and the ER docs and the nurses and all the people who sacrifice so much to take care of all of us.
First of all, wow, what a story. Incredible. Got little goosebumps. And second of all, I love that you both touched on the organizational piece of this, because I think it's very easy to to shrug it off and say it's self-care, it's self, you have to do it yourself, and then not provide any sort of meaningful supports for that, and cultivating a culture where self-care is supported and people are able to show up to work so that they have their cups filled and they can neutralize the environment so that they don't re-traumatize is such an important piece of this. And I love that you're bringing light too through the ways that, you know, we know our humanity can be deeply, deeply touched through empathy, both, you know, for maybe in challenging ways that can stress us and also in just wonderful ways. And as you've so elegantly addressed in the film and here with us tonight, I just really like that you were able to shine a spotlight on the other side of the impact of the work, the compassion satisfaction piece. Such an important acknowledgement and something that I think we almost use as a sort of mantra at the Institute on Trauma and Trauma-Informed Care is that what we notice and what we focus on grows bigger. So when we're able to notice strength and capacity and creativity and resiliency in others that we work with, we can unlock access to those powerful constructs that, as your film shows with those wonderful graphics, can really buffer the challenges that we've discussed, like compassion fatigue and burnout or rest out and vicarious. And you know, there's also different constructs like vicarious post-traumatic growth, as you just mentioned, the healing that comes from all of this. So I would just love if you could both expand a little bit more with us tonight on these profoundly meaningful impacts of the work that you've noticed.
Well, you want to jump into that one, Rodney, and then I'll.
Second story that I was talking about, but it shows what happens when the environment isn't there. And we also were very lucky to be invited to screen the film for the some firefighter cadets, and it's a very, very interesting thing happened at the end of the screening. First of all, you know, I don't know if all of you can tell, I'm a pretty burly guy, but I'm not like full of testosterone, and it was kind of interesting walking to a room of firefighter cadets. I looked at Vic, I go, there's a lot of testosterone in this room. After the film played, there were two people who were firefighters, and one of the things, you know, I think Charles Figley talks about this in the film, is that it's much better if the talk comes from someone who's like you than if it comes from people from the outside. So I think there was one of the counselors was in the room, right, Vic, and another firefighter. And so after seeing the film, both of them got up and gave these amazing accounts, heartfelt, truthful accounts of how their lives were impacted and devastated by not dealing with the trauma that they had encountered, both from being firefighters or being in the military, and the impact of the things that they've done on them. And how, I mean, the one guy was so honest. He talked about losing his marriage and his problems with addiction, and he was bringing it all back, this trauma. And after all that, and seeing the film, one of the cadets stood up and said, "Sir, I don't understand why anybody needs to talk about their problems, sir." Back down. And I was like, yeah, this is beyond my pay grade. I don't know how to answer this. I mean, after all of this, this is where you go. And then one of the firemen who was on our panel got up and tried to address it again. And he talked about, you know, you stuff all this stuff in your closet and eventually it's all going to come bursting out. And the point about that is it's not a culture that is set up to deal with their feelings or emotions. It's actually not encouraged. It's encouraged to suck it up, be a man, push through. And so it is so critically important that the environment you work in supports being able to be open about what was going on. And then I think, and certainly in the film, we show that, and I think that was one of the key things we wanted to show. These big, strong, burly guys breaking down because of the trauma that they had, and then dealing with it, not just falling apart or being self-indulgent or saying, "Someone please take care of me," but then actually dealing with it. And it was, it was so powerful, and helpful that the firefighters actually allowed us in to film their sessions that they had, because I think that's one of the most powerful sections of the film, where you really see them dealing with their issues.
Well, let me also respond a little bit in terms of the compassion satisfaction as well. And I worked part-time for 4 years in a hospice, and typically, and I was a medical social worker. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker in addition to being a filmmaker. And so I went from working 20 years in child welfare at several different levels to working in a hospice, and also working with doing geriatric counseling with elder folks. Well, it was like night and day, the two settings. When I would tell people I was working for the hospice, a lot of people would kind of groan and say, "Oh my God, how can you do that work?" Well, it was one of the most profoundly meaningful jobs I've ever had, because it's such an honor to be with people at this intimate time of their life and as they're approaching death, and to be with their families. There is an openness, and there is a sense of welcome and gratitude for your presence. If you go in there and you're fully present, as was our intention, my intention, and that of the team, it really is ideally a kind of compassion satisfaction that I experienced. And also working in geriatric counseling, I think a lot of it's a lot easier to get that compassion satisfaction when the client welcomes you and when they want your service, whereas in child welfare, you're just as likely to have the door slammed in your face, at least in the early stages, until you may have been able to develop and win the trust of some of the clients, and they begin to know why you're there, and that you do care for them. But yes, the compassion satisfaction comes from many different places: seeing the growth of the client, the development of the trust with the client, and the feeling that you really are able to make a contribution that's more visible than you may get in certain other settings. You may be making a wonderful contribution, but you may not get the feedback. I loved Rodney's story about those EMTs and firefighters that got the feedback that was so rare. And that really is where the compassion satisfaction comes. At the end of that evening that he was describing, there was a glow in the room of all the helpers, because they knew how profoundly important their work was. They said usually when we drop someone off at the hospital, we don't even know if they survive. And because of HIPAA and so forth, we can't even ask or find out in most cases. So yeah, I think the satisfaction comes from celebrating the positive results. Even if it's in stages, you may not get the final big celebration, but even to get some of it is what brings that.
My brain is so like right now, lots of good stuff. There are two things that I'm thinking of, and then I really do want to start thinking about opening this up to others if they have questions or thoughts. You were talking about the compassion, satisfaction, and today I saw a very brief story about a police officer that found a boy with autism that was roaming and was a nonverbal youth, and the police officer gave a piece of paper and a pen and was able to communicate and find out where he was coming from. Things like that need to be shown more often, and I think with this, with your film, we were able to capture an hour's worth of this kind of information, these kinds of stories, and we just need more of that. And I personally will watch the world news only because of the last minute, which is a good story from, whoever's presenting, because I need that in the work that I do. I cannot continuously watch the news of all that heavy heaviness that we all know exists after working, between an 8 to 10 hour day. The other piece that I wanted to kind of go back to, Vic, you started to talk a little bit about policy, and being that we're Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice, and I really encourage everybody to visit the website. This is an opportunity for us to have our voices heard. We're all here together for the same reason, because we got to witness and view an amazing film that talks about something that's so important, which is paying attention to the caregivers. And the way things change is when we can get policy enacted or even changed. And so Vic, could you just give a little bit more information about what happened with Philadelphia and the city council and policy there at a local level? Because I want to also stress too, is that while we're the national trauma campaign and we focus a lot on the federal level and trying to get our Congress people to hear us, we need to really pay attention to the state and local. And Vic has, a really great experience. If you could share that, and then we'll move into having other people jump in.
Well, the Philadelphia ACE Task Force has provided us with so much support and interest with this film. And the follow-up has been that as we began to talk about the need for policy, the task force created a committee, actually a couple of committees dealing with secondary trauma and policy work around that. And one of those, we went to a couple of our, I would say, very progressive city council members. One is Derek Green, the other is Helen Gim. And they were quite interested in the film. In fact, Councilman Green initiated a screening, much to our delight, with the professional union it's essentially the social work professionals that have a union. And he attended the event and was very touched by the film and the panel discussion that came afterwards, where union members were talking about their secondary trauma. And he said, we need to have public hearings about this topic. Well, we were just thrilled that he did that. And it took some months for that all to come together, but we had a full hearing of experts in this field that testified, and all of that was, by the way, is recorded. The complete, I think it was about 2.5 to 3 hours of testimony from a number of different kinds of experts. And so out of that, some months later, the city council passed a resolution. It's not a binding law or anything, but it's sort of like a goodwill, intentional kind of resolution that secondary trauma should be recognized by OSHA, federal OSHA, as a occupational hazard, and that it should be treated like the other occupational hazards. OSHA has historically just focused on physical danger and physical accidents. That's always been what it's done. Well, this is taking it to another whole level to say that it's hazardous work, what the essential workers are doing, what the healthcare workers are doing, what the nurses' aides are doing, and so forth, what the child welfare, and on and on and on. And that OSHA should create a standard, meaning a remedy, a response. And so that was passed unanimously, and it's in the process right now of being packaged, shall we say, that it'll be sent out by Derek Green's office soon to OSHA. Now that's a very long process. It can take 6 or 7 years to get something like that passed. So we're not talking about something that's going to happen next week. But OSHA and some of the federal agencies do have some very instructive websites And some of those even begin to address secondary trauma. So we're trying to promote at least the educational aspect of this while it goes through its stages. And we want to build a coalition around the country, people like yourselves, that will advocate to OSHA and will continue to provide evidence. We're going to give them all of the testimony from our public hearing, for example, but they need to be hearing from all over the country. So that's kind of where we're at with that right now. The committee has also put together a toolkit. It's a work in progress, but the link is on here for you at the very beginning of the chat. In fact, that the first 8 or 10 entries are resources that I'm sharing with you. And that toolkit has about 30 resources on it. Some of those are actual programs that provide staff resiliency supports in a variety of ways. And to me, that is so fascinating to see how different organizations do this. And then there are also a lot of resources. And in that list that I provided for you, there is also a Google Doc that's real simple. If you have a exemplary program in your organization that is addressing secondary trauma and resiliency, we would love to know about it. And if you would fill out that Google Doc, and then you just hit the submit button at the bottom of it and let us know what you're doing, if you might like to be contacted. This series that we have going of presenting exemplary programs, we're just starting with that, but we keep finding new ones that we want to feature. So that's kind of what we're doing.
That's very exciting to hear. Yes, everybody, please look at the chat. Please join the movement. That sounds amazing and important work. Thank you for advancing that. It is a process and takes a lot of dedication. So thank you for that. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. I certainly could sit here all day and come up with very, very many points of conversation. But if anyone wants to share in the chat, I would invite you to let us know and we can have you unmute.
Whitney, I think Gail had a question
awesome.
earlier in the chat. Let me
Gail
see.
and then Liz after Gail.
Awesome.
Okay.
Gail and Liz.
All right, Gail, I think you're unmuted.
Great. Hi, everybody. Hi, Vic
Gail.
and Rodney.
Nice
It's great. It's great to see you guys. And thank you for doing this. And thank you for sharing with the ACEs Connection community the ability to see your important film. I must say, I've known Vic, I've known you for quite some time and I've never seen it. But I've seen it now. And it just resonated so much. We're in California and as the fires are raging, thinking about those first responders. But my question was about the intersection between health equity and addressing inclusion and diversity trainings that are happening. And I know I'm just thinking about one, and it kind of goes to what people have been saying. There's a group from Florida and they were asked to train like the police officers in Orlando. And they went in as part of doing, I think, diversity training, but they were like, we just can't get very far because they had this woman that I know, she said there was a sign on the door as they walked into the room that said, leave your emotions at the door or something like that. And they would all hit it as they walked in. I still think about that comment that she said. So she said we just couldn't get anywhere because we realized we had to help them address their childhood trauma. She was coming from the ACEs perspective, their childhood trauma and the trauma that they were carrying around with them every day when, they saw these horrific things that happen. And so sort of both ways. So she was coming at it from a inclusion perspective and equity perspective, but then like, are you guys coming in from the health equity perspective as well? Hopefully that makes sense. It's been a long day.
That's okay. is your question how to try to bridge that kind of gap? And I think Rodney alluded to one of the important factors, and that is if you're going to train someone in an area that you're not yourself working in, we find it's essential to have that person on stage with you as a partner and as an example that coming as an outsider. I remember when I worked in child welfare, we would have these experts coming from the outside, but they knew nothing about child welfare. They knew maybe lots of things about various therapeutic methods and this and that, but they came from a world that wasn't relative and they couldn't connect. And that comes to mind in the description that you had, and certainly in areas of ethnicity. I think it's really important that people be partnered in demonstrating the relationships of trust and of collaboration, that this is possible. And often it's more your behavior than what you have to say or teach. I don't know if, Rodney, you might want to add something in terms of getting the entree and the trust. I believe that's kind of what you're looking at, isn't it, Gail?
What I was thinking of, and this goes to a lot of projects that I've done where I've used art, and as well as having either social workers or therapists or art therapists in the team, where I've gone in the schools or community centers or even nursing homes in the past. And I think it's the leadership setting a tone at the top, because without that, no matter what happens or who's brought in or what the teaching is or the training is, it's not going to make any difference. So and that means that the leadership has to have a change in how they think about what they're doing. And like, I think about the sign that you're saying, Gail, that was on the door, leave your emotions at the door. And that is so much, I mean, again, I'm a musician and an artist. I'm not a social worker, and I didn't go to social work school or anything like that. But I do have this understanding that that is so much of how you're taught to be when you're interacting with your clients. And that is no different than firefighters or doctors. They're all taught to, and I would say that the challenge or the shift is not leave your emotions at the door, but learning how to manage your emotions, or what a friend of mine who's a psychologist or therapist talks about, your intellectual IQ, your emotional IQ. Like we always talk about intelligence. Oh, you learned all this stuff, but if you're still a child, in some ways it doesn't really matter, because what are you going to be able to do with all the stuff you learned? How are you able to process it? So in order to do the thing you're doing without a change in the environment, or the change, and a change that's truly supported from the top, it's almost impossible. I think in the situations where I've seen and heard about things like that working, it's because there was a holistic change. There was a total change in how people were perceiving and thinking about, and then that allowed the work to happen within that.
Yeah, let me also say, well, I'm always so impressed working with Rodney and the social work depth that he has. He didn't have to go to school to understand all of this, social work school. But one would wish at such an organization that had a sign like that there would be another sign, is now that you're out, deal with your feelings. I think there is some legitimacy in terms of caregiving that, let's say you've had a fight with your wife or your child or whatever, with your next door neighbor. You don't want to take that kind of feeling into your session with someone. And there is a professionalism about leaving that kind of stuff outside the door and being truly present for your client with full attention and not preoccupied with your own stuff. You can deal with your own stuff in another setting, but not in the client's situation. But you're going to potentially get restimulated or have feelings that come up. I used to call secondary trauma, before there were common words for it, I called it grief, professional grief. And you may have a sense of real grief about what you're witnessing. And so you would want to deal with that outside. Sometimes in large, the other point Rodney was saying about top leadership, one would hope for top leadership and interest and an open view. But in some of these large bureaucracies that some of us have worked for, I worked for one with 600 employees, a vast agency. In that situation, as highly politicized, there was all kinds of stuff going on at the top level. We had to create our own nest, so to speak, at the middle and lower levels, and try to create our own pocket of protection and care for each other in order to be able to do the kind of things we're talking about. So much depends on the organizational setting and what you can do at whatever level you're working in.
I was had a thought about what you were saying, not that we're going to have one of our in-depth discussions, but I would say, and this is completely anecdotal, but as someone who's been a consumer of therapy, I have known when my coach or therapist uses, not necessarily is, again, this goes to what I was saying about emotional intelligence or intellectual or emotional IQ. When they use that thing that happened to them as a way of exposing or teaching or training or showing me something that I can't see,
yes,
very powerful. And that also is the same thing that I think I and many other artists use too. When I think of some of my favorite songs or songwriters or musicians, they are using sometimes the trauma that has happened to them to create a piece of work, and it is very personal, but at the same time there's a professional distance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we call that in social work a use of self.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's a conscious, aware use of one's own experience, usually in a somewhat limited manner, but enough to connect and to create a sense of trust and identification. So yeah,
but that it all does go to being able to manage. I mean,
that's right.
as a performer, one of the things that I'm often struck by is, and I don't perform as much as I used to, but going into that zone of what you need to bring out the emotion of a piece of music or
that's right. Mm-hmm.
And you do, it does have a physical impact on you. You may not be going back to the exact same place of a heartbreak or a loss or something, but you certainly do experience it as you're communicating to the audience.
Right.
10 minutes later, you're backstage and everybody's going, how wonderful it is. And you're like, yeah, thanks. Hey, how you doing?
Well, you folks are getting to see the kind of discussions that Rodney and I get into, and really they're embedded in the film. This is something that we talked in depth about, and we hope that the artistry of the film and the stories portray this relationship and what we have taught each other over these years. Thank you, Rodney.
I love that we got that little snapshot of those conversations. That was a magical moment for me. And I'm mindful of time, so I want to give the stage to Liz, and then I would love to ask Vic and Rodney if they have any parting words for anything that we didn't address, and then we can close up for the evening. Although I'll hang around if you want to tell more stories.
Hi, folks. I'm Liz. I'm a writer. I'm not a psychologist or a social worker. The first thing is the policy thing that I put into the chat. I have, my mother has worked in tobacco control in California for about 25 or 30 years. And when she started, you could still smoke in bars, you could still smoke in workplaces. And they basically went city by city to get things like smoke-free restaurants passed.
Mhm.
That was the first step. And there was enough of a, the snowball started rolling down the hill. And eventually they were able to get like a statewide smoke-free workplaces and, but it's still city by city. And now they're working on smoking in residential settings and multi-unit housing like apartments and condos. And that's a huge issue. But step by step, city by city, until they get to a statewide. And when you do things on the local level, then activists at the local level in other states see what you're doing and you share best practices, all this stuff. But I'm just saying, you work from both ends. You work at the national and you work at the local, and eventually you meet in the middle. And then I put a link in the chat. We have a release date now. I'm the writer of a musical about healing PTSD. And it'll be released on October 17th on Vimeo. You have to sign up on the website to get on my email list, and then you'll get an email about the release, and it'll be free to watch, but you'll still have to register. And who knows, maybe we'll be able to have a discussion about it later in the winter or early in the year. But yeah.
That's really wonderful. And I'm thinking that, yes, it does snowball from city to city, town to town, and maybe CTIP can also help us with that. For example, I think that, speaking for myself, and I believe Rodney would agree, that we could be resources to many other communities, especially those that have ACEs task forces, to not only share the film, but the policy work and how we're doing that, and to see if they can get that started in their local levels. And they can be writing to OSHA and getting on the bandwagon to promote all this. And Liz, I'd love to know more about your work. I'm putting my email and phone number in here if anyone wants to be in touch, Liz and others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love to hear about.
Love to hear from you. Mm-hmm.
We may be able.
Actually, if there's anybody who just wants to raise their hand and say, oh, I want to be on your mailing list, just put your email in the chat and I'll send you notice about the event.
Mm-hmm.
Vic, you're already on my mailing list.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. I'll look forward to hearing from you.
And I just put in my email for the National Trauma Campaign. So if somebody's interested with CTIP and having a hard time navigating the website, Whitney just put hers in. We can also communicate with our team members. So we're happy to, when Vic made that suggestion, that's a really great idea. So thank you so much, Liz, for sharing that. And then I really want to be mindful of time. We've actually, it looks like a couple people have moved on with their evening. And Vic and Rodney, do you want to give some closing statements? And then we'll do a very quick, very 1 minute quick calming exercise to be in the spirit of self-compassion and collective care.
Well, I guess the only closing I would say is it's been a real privilege and honor to interact here and talk with you about the film and the policy work. And we want to continue to be available as resources, screenings, information about the film. Feel free to visit our website at caregiversfilm.com and let us know what questions that you might have.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank everybody for watching the film and attending the Q&A, and to thank all of you for putting it together, because without you, we wouldn't be here right now.
We'd be talking to ourselves, right?
But yeah, thank you all so much for doing this.
Thank you so much. And I would love to be on a fly on the wall, or actually sit in space with you anytime.
Great.
Conversations. We can, I know how to get a hold of you guys. So
good.
I'm going to reach
let's
out
stay
and
in touch. Yeah,
meetings.
that's great. And you live close enough.
Yeah, for sure. Whitney, did you have anything else that you needed before we wrap up?
Nope,
No?
take us on out, Erin.
All right. So we are, let me I have a clip thing here to hold my papers, and the article that's under it is called Gratitude is an Attitude. So I can't even stress enough how grateful I am for Vic, for Rodney, for Whitney, for Sissy, for Robin, and for all of you that participated tonight. Watch the film, or if you didn't get to watch the film, Robin did put a link in there for 24 hours. And just thank you for all you are doing to make this world better, healthier, and hopefully more trauma competent, because we're beyond trauma informed in this group. We're trauma competent. So I'm going to close with a 1 minute. It's a 1 minute meditation. It's actually like 30 seconds. And it's just a calming. So you don't even, if meditation's not your thing, that's okay too. It's really just focusing on your breath and hearing my words. I invite you to get comfortable, however, if your feet on the floor or whatever works for you. You can lower your gaze, you can close your eyes. Again, safety, making sure that you feel safe and secure. Take a breath in through your nose and let it go out your mouth. Again, breathing in through the nose, breathing out through the mouth. Breathing in, feeling the lungs expanding. Breathing out, feeling a sense of letting go. Breathing in to feel the body getting fuller. Breathing out to feel the release of any tension. Breathing in, feeling alive and awake. Breathing out, feeling muscles relaxing. Breathing in, that sense of fullness. Breathing out, that unnecessary tension. And as I usually close my practice, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, which means may all beings be happy and free. And with that, thank you. Have a wonderful, peaceful, restful night. And I look forward to connecting with you sometime in cyberspace in the future.
So long, everyone.
And thank you all enough. Take good care. Be well.
Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we going to be able to get a copy of this, the video?
Heck yes.
Thank you.